It was the
ruling.
What?
You were.
All those company logo bumpers are pulled from this year's crop of IGF games. I'm Bennett Foddy.
I'm Zach Gage.
And if you're not familiar with our work, you're about to be. This is a really personal talk. In preparing this talk, I went through and looked at the 500 or so IGF trailers that are on YouTube for this year's IGF. I wanted to see how hard it would be to figure out who the developers were on each game. So I looked to see if their names were in the trailer, the metadata under the trailer, or if they had a link to the website. I clicked through and went to see if their names were there as well. And these are the numbers for 100 or so of this year's IGF games. Less than a quarter of them have the developer names anywhere near the trailer, and less than half have the names on the game website. The numbers are significantly lower if you limit it to games that are on sale for money, or that have a Steam wishlist page, or some other kind of thing that's indicating it's going to be on sale for money. So my takeaway from that is that indie game developers don't like their names to be too visible on their game, especially if they're planning to sell it for money. They do like putting company branding very, very visibly on their game.
That's a pretty high horse, Bennett. Aren't you kind of guilty of this as well?
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I've been part of that culture. This is a game I worked on called Sports Friends. This is what you see when you load up Sports Friends. There's a logo, yeah, company logo. And then there's 5 more logos, 6 logos all up. One of them is for a person's name. The others are company logos. In fact, that QWOP logo isn't even a company logo because I don't have a company. It's just me pretending I have a company and a company logo and putting that at the start of the game. And I can't even tell you why I did that rather than putting my name there. It just seemed like it was the thing to do. But hold on a second, Zach. What about your games prior to this year?
You got me. That's true. I did basically hide behind this totally impenetrable logo for a very long time. But since last year, all my games look like this.
All right, so some of you are probably starting to think, well, I have a really good reason for using a company logo instead of my own name. So all right, let's talk about some of those reasons why you might want to do that. Some of these reasons are really good reasons. First of all, a big one. Maybe you just hate your name.
I like your name, Bennett.
Exactly. Maybe your given name sounds ridiculous or fake. Maybe you've spent your whole life feeling embarrassed when you introduce yourself. You know, it's possible to imagine that happening, hypothetically. But above feeling embarrassed, there could be a good practical reason why you don't want to use your name. Charlotte Bronte, like many others, had to deal with a widespread prejudice against female authors, and she did that by using a male pen name. And there's a really long history in the arts of people choosing a different name to represent their work, including pen names, stage names, and other names of choice, like preferred names or romanizations of non-English names. Lewis Carroll, Slash, Helen Mirren, Cactus are all names that were chosen by the artist, and they always use those names in connection with their creative work. Helen Mirren's birth name is a little harder to pronounce in English. Lewis Carroll had an academic writing career as well and wanted to differentiate his creative work. Slash was just given this really cool name by a friend. And I think there's just like a million good reasons to use a name of your own choosing rather than your given name. So as long as the name that you're using identifies a person rather than a company, we are 100% on board with that. We're behind you. And it's also really important to acknowledge at this point, not everybody is going to feel safe being identified at all in their creative work, regardless of whether it's through a company name or through an individual name. So if you need your work to be totally anonymous, that's a great reason not to put your name or your company logo on it, and we're not questioning that at all, just to be totally clear.
If you're working as part of a team, probably the biggest issue with putting names on your game is having to think about who gets credit. And this is an extremely understandable concern. Working with other people is hard enough without having to bring credit into the mix. But that said, if your game is successful at all, this is an issue that probably will come up anyway. So it's worth at least looking down that road in advance. Something I've learned about credit over the past couple of years is that it really exists in two pieces. One of the pieces is how your team chooses to credit itself. And then the second piece is how the world chooses to credit you. And the first one of those you have absolute control over, but the second one, you can only really hope to influence it. And this can make giving credit particularly complicated, especially in situations where members of the team have different levels of public exposure. There's no real simple solution to this. It's just good to go into this process being aware of it. For example, this is the opening screen of Ridiculous Fishing, a game that Greg Wolwind and I worked on that very few people know that we worked on. Maybe people in this room, but out of this room, very few people. And that's despite putting this title screen up first, despite Rami and JW working really hard to make sure that we were credited in press pieces. We did what we could to make it clear who was involved, but there was only so much we could do, and that is totally fine with us. We knew that that was going to be an issue going in.
One time I was at a festival exhibiting Multi-Bowl, a game I made with the amazing, talented designer AP Thompson. And right next door, the game next door was staffed by Jenny Jiaxia, who was showing Bewitched, a game that she made that was also designed and coded by AP Thompson. And somehow his name had been left off the printed signs for both games. We were horrified, and Jenny and I wound up finding Sharpies and modifying the signs by hand at the last second. You can see Jenny did a much better job than me. But in fact, that had become a pattern for both of those games, even though AP was clearly credited in both. So to be clear, nobody in this example or in Zach's example was acting in bad faith. Not the developers, not the festival organizers, not the press. Everyone was trying to get it right, and yet it still doesn't always turn out how you want. So yeah, we've both had experiences where this was really hard to get right. But it's not impossible to get it right. This year, I worked on a game called Ape Out as part of a 3-person team. And we approached the problem this way, both in the trailer and in the beginning of the game. So obviously, the first person in a list like that is going to get more visibility, which happens to be what we wanted in this case. But we've actually found that all 3 of us are mentioned in the majority of press articles and tweets and so on. And maybe that's just good luck. Maybe that's a bit of good luck. But it's not always easy to control who gets credit for a game. But one thing is totally for sure. If you don't put any names on your game, then nobody gets any credit. Which is fairer, sure, that is totally fair, but it's fair in the way that it's totally fair if nobody in the world gets any food. And I think it's definitely possible to do a little better than that. OK, next reason people give. I know a lot of indie developers have this idea that they're going to use this company logo and this company name from their trailer for a bunch of different games, and eventually growing their business into a giant brand with a large number of employees. Like, dress for the job you want, not the job you have. And you might think, Activision started as an indie game developer in 1979, 4 people. And you might think something like this. Well, if they had to call their first game David Crane's Fishing Derby instead of Activision Fishing Derby, it would have been much harder for his co-founders to grow the company. After all, Crane didn't work on every game. And he departed 7 years later and took any artistic cachet that his name might have had with him, while Activision continued to grow into this huge corporate brand. So maybe your company, Awesomeware Games, is going to be like Activision. You don't want to hitch your fortune to any single person's name. And what I want to say about that is, that's totally valid, but I want to caution you that it is numerically very unlikely. If you take all the game companies on Moby Games, which is thousands of companies over 4 or 5 decades, the median number of games that each company worked on is 1. I did the analysis. Moby Games is missing as well a lot of the indie companies in this room and that have come before. But I'm willing to bet that if we took all the indie games that are missing from Moby Games and rolled them into this data, the median would be even more 1. That means your company is more likely to work on 1 game than any other number of games. And in fact, more than half of all companies have shipped only 1 game. And if you form a company and you release a great game and you attach all the visibility and all of the respect, all the kudos, all the press to the company instead of to the person who made it or the people who made it, and then you fold the company, all that work building the brand just vanishes. Meanwhile, you as a person will most likely to go on and work on many more than 1 game in your career. So you might be thinking, well, of course, there are strong, identifiable company brands in indie games. Zach already mentioned BIEHN, who have been releasing about a game a year for about 10 years. Sock Pop have released 32 games as a collective in the past 3 years, right? And their body of work has this really, really clear artistic identity. So yeah, if you buck the trend and you release more than 1 game, you can get some value out of the company name, both artistically and in terms of branding. But the odds are you're going to fold the company after you launch 1 game. So you might want to think about at least sharing credit between your name and the company brand.
If you're a modest person, you might feel like signing your games is just gross. I can relate to this.
So true story. Before I released Getting Over It, I was trying to convince Zach that Gage Solitaire should be called Gage Solitaire. Gage Solitaire doesn't mean anything. That's meaningless. So, but he said no on the grounds that it seemed too egotistical.
And it did. It still seems gross to me. But I think that's kind of the point, right? For some reason, naming my game Gage Solitaire is gross. But saying Sage Solitaire, a game by Zach Gage, it feels totally fine to me. I don't know why. And I think, hold on. I think that's kind of the nuance that we're asking from you here, right? We're not standing up here saying that you need to do something that makes you feel bad. We're inviting you to engage with something that you might have not engaged with because it made you uncomfortable. We're saying, let's greet this discomfort head on and try to find something meaningful and personal, something that feels good, something that works for you. Otherwise, you're just settling for the default. And whenever you settle for the default, it's worth thinking about where that default came from and what it means.
All right, so let's take a few minutes to talk about that. It's easy to lose sight of where our traditions come from. And sometimes when you really look at the history of a tradition, you might wonder why we're continuing it year over year. In the 1970s, as Atari moved from arcade manufacturing into console manufacturing, it quite famously began to eliminate the designers' names from their games and from the packaging. The Atari logo would be listed prominently on the packaging, but none of the developers' names were ever mentioned. And that very quickly became the industry standard here in the USA. Warren Robinette, the designer of Adventure, invented the idea of the Easter egg as a kind of low-key rebellion against that policy. In that game, if you find an invisible single pixel object and you take it and 3 other objects to a particular room and pass through the wall, you get to this secret room and he hid his name. Like the reward is you get to see the developer's name. And Warren Robinette knew that Atari wouldn't see that, they wouldn't find it until all of the cartridges had been printed and sold, and he quit his job so he couldn't get in trouble. But that's also been the norm in Japan. Over in Japan, Yuji Naka staged a very similar rebellion at SEGA. So it was also policy at SEGA that developers couldn't use their real names. And on the loading screen for Sonic 1, the developer names are actually there, but they're in black text on a black background. But if you put in a secret button code, the names show up. If the designers of the games seemed so desperate to put their names on them, well, why weren't they allowed to? I think this video, which is from 1982, it's like an ABC News segment, helps to shed a little bit of light.
We go by what we call what's in the cash box.
You know, like I was mentioning, the cash box is a cruel mistress.
And that's what we go by.
Jack Middle is president of Taito America. This is a company that first had Space Invaders until it sold the license to Bally. Sometimes this can get a little confusing. Taito let us videotape in a room called Deep Engineering. Without being overdramatic about the whole thing, this is the most secure room in the plant. This is where the game gets its life and personality from computer programmers. Because of the fierce competition among video game companies, Taito requested we do not use last names. But Rex is working with Mark on a new game called Toasters and Chainsaws. Mark is computing what will appear on the screen. Rex is using a computer to synthesize the sound you will hear when the game hits the arcades.
Right, because of the fierce competition between companies. What that means is the company is worried that if the designers' names were known, then Rex or Mark might have gotten a better offer at another company. They might have broken out of deep engineering and been able to get a different job.
So weird.
It is weird. Some designers have even staged more organized, effective rebellions against this. So it happened a while ago in board games. In 1988, at the Nuremberg Toy Fair, a number of well-known board game designers, they signed this Beer Coaster Declaration by Reinhold Wittig, pledging that they would never allow a publisher to print their game designs if their names were not written on the box. And that did become the norm in board games starting in the 1990s. One of the best-known recent rebellions against the lack of credit was the case of Metal Gear Solid 5, where Konami removed Kojima's name from the box art really late in the process. And Kojima responded dramatically by inserting prominent, detailed credits into every single mission of the game. So all of this is just to say, although AAA games and tabletop games have this long history as well of downplaying the developer names, that's not something the developers have wanted or accepted. They know credit is important, and they've fought for it, and they've kind of rebelled against those policies. But they have commercial forces pushing them to remove their names and associate the games with the companies instead. As indie developers, we don't have that kind of force pushing on us. If we're erasing our names from the games, we're doing that voluntarily. We're doing something voluntarily that developers in other areas are actively trying to resist and rebel against.
In some industries, these rebellions have led to different defaults than we have in indie games, even in industries with comparable team sizes and structures to our own. So this is how indie films handle credit. We can look at, oops, whoa, there we go.
So playing, might have to go back.
Oh yeah. So this is how The Terminator, an extremely famous movie, indie movie, handles it. There's a name. Another name. There are a lot of names here. Actually, indie films might be doing it too well, because it would take us like 5 minutes to get through this opening sequence, and it's only names. So maybe there's somewhere less far from us, less far than indie films, that we could look at for better crediting practices. And it actually turns out we can just look at the non-professional side of indie games. In community mods, names are everywhere, which is kind of weird, right? Because you'd think that in a world where loads of people, entire communities are working on things, that names would be the least important aspect. There's so many people contributing to these projects. But it actually doesn't work that way. And I wonder if it's because map creators have always typically been credited. I don't know why. It just is how it worked, actually. The earliest name that I ever remember seeing in a video game is Cliff Bleszinski's name in Unreal Tournament, way back as the person who's making some of the maps. And it's a charming, easy to remember name. So it's stuck in my mind. And as mods have turned into full games, this trend has really continued. When Valve decided to make Dota 2, they bragged to the news about hiring IceFrog. They didn't call it IceFrog's Dota, but that's changing. So clearly, some developers, even developers at big companies, are starting to put their names on their games. And that doesn't still mean that it would be easy for us to change in our little corner of indie games where the default is still to be a company. Because breaking from norms is uncomfortable. And to do that, especially with such personal work, it requires a lot of effort. So Bennett and I wanted to share with you guys why we did it, the thought that we put into it, and hopefully give you a fuller picture of it, even if ultimately you decide, I don't want to put my name on this thing. So why do I put my name on my games? I think there are really two questions here. Why did I do it, and why do I do it now? And I'll just start with the easy one. Why did I put my name on my games? Initially, I just did it because I came from the arts. And in the arts, you sign your work. I am not a good painter. This is the best painting I've ever made. Warning, it's not a good painting. But there it is in the lower right-hand corner. I signed it. I was proud of it at the time in college. And so there you go. That's me signing my work. Also, when you sign up for the App Store, if you don't have a company, you just use your name. So I kind of benefited from this sort of double default coming into making indie games. And it turned out that in the game space, this default decision was actually an accidentally radical business decision. And I didn't really care for business decisions at the time that I made it. I was the opinion that art and great games stand for themselves, and promoting them is gross, and I wouldn't be a part of it, and that I wasn't going to be that asshole walking around talking about how good my stuff was. So this one accidental business decision, it ended up being my only business decision for a number of years, and that gave it this weird sort of power, and it slowly, quietly became the entire core of my business philosophy. Putting my name on my work forced me out into the public realm in a way that I didn't understand at the time that I made that decision, or didn't make that decision, I guess. But as I released more games, my name started to come up in press pieces, and in comments, and in forums, and the press started to want to talk to me on podcasts and interview me in their articles. Interviewers started to ask me deeper questions about my work. They started to find lines of continuity between my works, and the conversation started to become really fun for me. I ended up learning a lot about myself and about my practice through these interviews and these podcasts. And I started becoming comfortable sharing the things that were exciting to me, why I liked making what I was making, what was exciting about it. And it made me realize that promotion didn't have to be soulless or hype-centric. It could just be about transparency and honesty, about opening up to the world and sharing why I was doing the things that I was doing, what mattered to me. It was really just a different way of telling the kinds of stories that I was already trying to tell through my games. This decision to put my names on my games locked me into a certain level of thought and consideration about every single choice that I was making. And it meant that anytime I did something that was challenging to common perceptions, I had to think about why I was doing that, what was important about it, and how I was excited about it. And this process of doing those things really ended up being a major driver in most of my most successful work. A few years ago, I made a game called Really Bad Chess. It's a chess game where you get random starting pieces, and everything is a mess, but it turns out that it's kind of fun. But it's not about a mess turning out to be fun. It's about my feelings that fairness is overrated, that people think they like fairness, but really, actually, we love unfairness. Chess is a boring game to me because it's so ridiculous and grossly obsessed with being fair, and I wanted to turn that on its head and see what that did. And this idea that the press for Really Bad Chess wasn't going to be about the game itself, but about my connection to the game, why I made it, the meaningfulness of my relationship to fairness and the world, that came out of the line of thinking that started with putting my name on my work, standing behind it. It forced me to come to terms with the idea that the public reception of my work was actually stronger if I was in it, if the work was about my connection to the world, the birth of the idea, and not just the contents of the game itself. And this has been really successful for me. Really Bad Chess got covered in loads of places, including Slate, and that Slate piece ended up getting me an interview on NPR, which is really like kind of a ridiculous thing to happen for a very small mobile phone game. So now I put my name in front of all my games because I want to lean into this humanity, to my connection to these games. And I use this idea as a guide for all of my other business decisions. So as I said, I'm coming to this as an artist. I'm not a business person. So having a moral and ethical framework to use on the business side is something that has really helped me out in terms of making me feel comfortable putting the effort and the work into the things that aren't the games, the stuff around them. So here's an example. A few years ago, two things started to come up every single time I talked to strangers and they asked me what I did. The first one was when I encountered people who had played my games. Many of them could identify one game I'd made, but they didn't know about others that I'd made, even if they'd played them and liked them. So many times people would come up to me and be like, oh my God, you also made whatever. The other thing that happened is when I encountered people who didn't know about my work or who didn't play video games, the conversation also often become kind of excruciating as I tried to explain what I did. Video games are stuck with this very low culture label, which sucks, right? I don't feel that way about video games. You probably don't feel that way about them. And I started to become convinced that this problem is because most people out there see games as disposable toys, not as artistic works. And I think that happens because we hide the people who make them. This is something that Bennett is going to actually get more into pretty heavily in a moment, so I don't want to go too much into it. But I did just want to say that I think it really changes the way that people understand and relate to art when they can see the people in it. Anyway, I realized actually both of these problems are essentially outreach problems. So I had this little widget built for my games, initially by John Brodsky and then later rebuilt by Denver Coulson. And the idea with this widget is that it sits on the main screen of my games, and it serves a bunch of different purposes. This is what it looks like. Cool. Games. So on the business end, it cross-promotes my other games. It allows me to send messages to everybody who's playing my games when I release something new that they might care about. And it allows people to sign up for my mailing list. And it makes it clear to everybody what I've worked on. Nobody's telling me, oh my God, I can't believe you worked on that too. Nothing particularly groundbreaking though, although still not something a lot of indies are doing, but nothing amazing. But on the values end, it shows who I am, a real human being. Right at the top, a big, embarrassing, dumb photo of me. Hi, I hate that. It was really hard to pick that photo out, but it really matters that it's there. It also lets me tell you what my games are about in my own words, not in the words of journalists or app stores. And it also lets me send you messages about things that I think matter beyond the scope of games, like when there's an election. I would never have been comfortable spending time on something so businessy if I couldn't have married it with the values that I have. And the truth is, I think this is what people actually want. I think they want the values. That's why they come to artistic mediums in the first place. And the business that I built is just this mechanism that I can use to share these values. But if you don't care about values, here are some numbers. After I put this in my games, I had an additional 8,000 downloads in 4 days, and 65% of those people bought the games, which is absolutely stupid because my games are free to play and you don't have to buy them. I also tripled the size of my mailing list, which is completely ridiculous. And, but most important to me, these numbers are not just business success numbers. They represent people that I've connected to, whom my work is connected to, people who are learning and exploring and enjoying the space of games and the humanity within that space. I don't often know how people come to my games. I don't do analytics, and not a lot of, even if I did, there's not too much that I could really learn. But in the case of these 8,000 people, I know that they went through the door that I set up with my values and the story that I think matters. And as an artist, that's the thing that I really care about. And it totally trips me out that this can basically be accomplished with cross-promotion.
All right, as you saw in the Sports Friends loading screen, I didn't start out with this point of view. I had the default point of view everybody else has. So this is something that I've arrived at relatively recently. And I wanted to take a few minutes just to tell you about how I wound up there and how I think about it now. Back in 2013, I made a real-time chess game for 16 people, and I called it Bennett Foddy's Speed Chess. And at the time, to be honest, that was just a flippant joke about Sid Meier. I really hadn't thought about it at all. It's just a joke. But the idea started to nag at me, and it seemed a little bit more interesting. And if I think back, actually, there was a long string of games that I played growing up that experimented with prominent author placement. And it always seemed exciting and radical to me when I would encounter them. Richard Garriott's nom de plume, Lord British, appears both as the author and as the authority character, the king, in the Ultima series of games, starting in Ultima 1 and Ultima 2. I love that series of games. And in 1999, I was finally able to download, after years of waiting, I was able to download the demo of this game I was so hyped for, Ultima 9. And not many people have seen this, I guess, in this room, but when you boot up that demo for the game, Richard Garriott appears, sort of half in character as Lord British and half as Richard Garriott. I'm going to just show you the beginning of that.
Greetings, I am Richard Garriott, known to some of you as Lord British, and today I've brought you deep into the dungeons below Britannia Manor to introduce to you at long last the demo to Ultima 9 Ascension.
He goes on in that video to explain their creative goals in making the game, what they're hoping for your experience. And the video and the situation is kind of awkward through 2019 eyes, but it was so unexpected, it sort of stuck in my mind for 20 years as a memorable experience. And around 1999, we go a couple years forward into the future, it was about that time that art games started to emerge. And just like today, the people who make art games feature themselves and their names more prominently in their games, presumably because that's just normal if you think about yourself as making art rather than games. In 2001, Tale of Tales put 3D scans of their own naked bodies into a virtual Garden of Eden in this Quake 3 mod, Eden.garden. And a couple years after that, Mary Flanagan's Unreal Tournament mod, Domestic, 2003, I think is one of the first games that's overtly about the designer's autobiographical experience, and it features her name prominently as well. I think that's the first autobiographical game from some point of view. When you get to the end of Sexy Hiking, which was first released around the same time, 2002, the reward for beating the game is you get to virtually meet the designer, Yasuo. He wrote a thank you poem to himself, comparing himself to Jesus. And there's a song, and it features his smiling face. So fast forward a decade to 2015, 2 games came out that year that had a huge impact on me. In Nina Freeman's Sybil, you're literally asked to play as Nina.
Want to do a run together?
Taking her perspective in a way that I had never really been asked to do by a game before. Huge impact on me. And in the beginner's guide, Davey Reedon is in your ear the whole time while you're playing, speaking. And the trailer for that game is actually super helpful for understanding what I'm talking about here, so I'm just going to play the first part of it.
Let's say you sit down at a stranger's computer. You start opening up files and looking through stuff, and eventually you come to a folder that just says, My Work. So you open it, and you click on a random file, and it's a video game that looks like this. If you had to guess, what would you say you know about this person right now? Like, maybe they're kinda goofy.
All those games were really meaningful to me as a player. I think much more meaningful for the fact that I understood the games to be the work of actual human beings. It felt like when I was playing the games, I was somehow in dialogue with the designers, responding to ideas or arguments that they were putting forward in their designs. And when I appreciate artwork in any other medium, or including games actually, whether it's music, film, fine arts, literature, I feel like one of the deepest, most important and beautiful parts of it is the sense that I'm getting an understanding of the person or the people behind those things and seeing their perspectives. If you look at Frida Kahlo's self-portraits, it's impossible not to connect to the sense of defiance against social norms, social roles and artistic norms. Or if you play one of Jeff Minter's games, right? It's so clear how they connect to his childhood playing Golden Age arcade games and his interest in psychedelics. Those connections help me to understand each piece of work and how it relates to the artist's other work. For me, that's the good stuff in indie games. That's what I'm here for. That's why I play them. One of the reasons it seems so radical to put a personal side in the game, I think, is that this idea of games being the products of human beings, they're made by human beings, that idea runs contrary to the overwhelming trend in the culture. So I feel like there's this ongoing crisis of depersonalization in games, where the people who play our games are disconnected from the idea that we are human beings. So on the extreme end, there's review bombings and these kind of pro-consumerist campaigns. But even just the tone of regular, everyday technical support can reveal a human disconnect between the people who make games and the people who play them. I feel honestly like I shouldn't have to work hard to convince you of this. Probably everybody in this room has had some kind of exchange with a player where they were treated like a giant corporation rather than as a person. Conversely, I've noticed that when we put a human face on our games, sometimes that adversarial relationship just kind of melts away because most people are basically decent and empathetic when they realize that they're talking to a person instead of a corporation. In this exchange, a person goes from being like aggressive out of nowhere to sweet, just with one personal note from the designer. And it's Chris Hecker, so sweet guy. But if it was just a question of avoiding getting yelled at in your Steam forums, that would be fine, that would be easy, because you could just respond personally to every person who was mad at you, and you could get them to simmer down. But to me, these exchanges are a sign that something that should be happening when people play our games is sort of failing to happen. I want to be treated by my audience as a human being. That's something I want for me. But I also want for them to be able to see me as a human being, because if they aren't doing that, they're missing out on half of what makes my games beautiful, what makes them enjoyable. So it was with all of that in mind that I started to push the game that I was working on at the time, Getting Over It, in the direction of overt self-humanization. I put my name on the title again, this time with much more intent behind it, trying to frame the game as a thing made by me, a particular person, for the player, who is also a particular person. And I'm going to play some clips from the game. It's got my voice in it. It's very embarrassing for me. I really, I hope you feel a little sorry for me. This is going to be torture. So I had the idea, I was really inspired by Davy's game, that I could help the player to understand where I was coming from if I just straight up explained where I was coming from while they were playing the game.
A funny thing happened to me as I was building this game. I'd have an idea for a new obstacle, and I'd build it, test it, and it would usually turn out to be unreasonably hard. But I couldn't bring myself to make it easier. It already felt like my inability to get past the new obstacle was my fault, as a player rather than as a builder. Imaginary mountains build themselves from our efforts to climb them, and it's our repeated attempts to reach the summit that turns those mountains into something real.
As you go further along in that game, I stop explaining my ideas and I start trying to reflect the fact that the player has been sitting and listening to me yammer on and playing my game for several hours, drawing attention to the fact that we must at least have certain tastes in common if they've played that far in the game.
It feels like we're closer now, composer and climber, designer and user. You could have refused, but you didn't. There was something in you that was hidden, that chose to continue.
Finally, by the very end of the game, I'm sincerely thanking the player for putting in the effort.
Now, you've conquered the ice cliff, the platforms, the church, and the rectory, the living room and the factory, the playground, the construction site, the granite rocks, and the lakeside. You've learned to hike. There's no way left to go but up, and in a moment, I'll shut up. But let me say, I'm glad you came.
Thanks. When I was writing and recording those lines, I actually found that the way I was thinking about my players was changing too. If I'm honest, I came into the process of making this game harboring certain resentments about the players who treat my games as disposable fun machines or rage engines, or who just watch them being played on YouTube and then kind of click away. I was kind of resentful of those people. But in the process of recording those lines, I started to feel closer to them. And I started to feel more appreciative of the contribution that they would make to the game by playing it, partly because I was having to play it myself. It's a pretty annoying game. But I was feeling closer to the players. Inspired by Jazzuo's game, I wanted to go further and put a reward at the end of the game for people who finished it. But I wanted to make it a real way to connect with the real individuals who finished the game. I figured it would be a special moment for a small handful of people. And I kept it secret for a while, but I'm going to spoil it for you now if you haven't seen this, so plug your ears if you haven't played it yet. The first thing that happened is a friend suggested I could show a live feed of my computer's webcam, to my desk, and I could wave at players who finished the game and be like, hello, like Richard Garriott in the Ultimate demo. But it's a little too invasive, partly because I work on a laptop. So I had this idea instead that what if when you finish the game, you get to visit a chat room? And maybe I'll be there. And so I built one, and I set it up so my phone would get a notification if somebody finished the game, and I could run over to my computer and jump into the chat room and talk to them right as they finish the game. I want to share some of that with you. This was one of the first people to finish the game. And the first thing he does is he connects his experience of playing it to earlier games of mine. He says, I've been playing all your games since I was a kid. He's connecting it to my other work. That was huge for me. So my QWOP antics got me into trouble in computer science. I hear about that a lot. A lot of people who reached the end of the game just couldn't believe that they were talking to me. This was really common. Here I share a yee with Zoe. You really can't believe I'm there. Some people just refuse to believe and logged out. It's like not talking to a robot. Some people just wanted to say thanks for the game. And I wanted to take time to thank them for playing through it as well. It's usually what I said, congratulations and thanks for playing. And they would say thank you for the game. I really love these moments. This was really meaningful to me. But the best ones, the ones that meant most to me, were these cases where I could share a feeling with the player. A feeling that I had felt myself playing my own game, but I wanted them to feel when they were playing it. So in this case, this player says he started to feel like he felt more relief from falling back down in the game than he did from making progress, which was exactly how I wanted him to feel. And this player, by the way, was among the first to finish getting over it, but still hangs out in a fan Discord for the game every single day. On the mobile version, there's no chat room because it's not guaranteed online, but there's an invitation to send me an email. So that's similar to what Davey has something similar in the beginner's guide. I really want to emphasize the humanity that comes out in this exchange, right? This person, these are two emails from the same account that came within 5 minutes of each other. The game is really intentionally frustrating and anger-inducing. And the fact that this person understood that I was a human being, even when they're just sending angry emails and getting no response, that was extremely satisfying.
I feel like we've gotten a little off topic, Bennett. What does this have to do with putting your name on the game?
Yeah, fair, all right. It's a fair question. For me, putting my name on my game sent me down a road of thinking about how indie games are mostly depersonalized and reflecting on what I could do to change that in my own work, how I could signal to the player that I was a human being. And in the end, it changed the way that I was able to relate to the fans of Getting Over It, and I hope to the way that they were able to relate to me and to my work.
And for me, it set me on the road to finding a way to relate to running my business as an artist. It helped me not feel like an asshole when it came time to promote my games.
Ultimately, putting your name in the title of the game doesn't matter. That's just a symbol of something that's more important. Whether you're making a live chat server or building a cross-promotional widget, writing cinema-style credits, or just having your name show up at the start of the game or at the start of the trailer, all those choices have the same effect, which is to draw you closer to your audience and to draw your audience closer to you.
And if we push in this direction as a group, we have the potential of moving the whole industry towards a more culturally important and powerful place, a place in the arts alongside film and television and sculpture and music, a place where video games are not even video games. They're just video games.
All right, this has been a talk by us, Bennett Foddy
and Zach Gage.
OK, I guess we've got some time for questions.
Kevin Harper, Us to New York. I guess where I'm struggling a little bit on my indie side is there are times where I need to sell out, so to speak, and I'm not necessarily proud of what I put out. at times? How do you feel about putting your name on something that you're not also happy about?
It's such a good question. I mean, yeah, I think we should be clear. We're not trying to say that everybody should do this in every case. There's going to be good reasons in many cases to not do it. And one reason might be that you're not ready to stand behind it as part of the other parts of your artistic practice.
Yeah, I think a bigger thing than just like putting your name on the thing that you built is kind of like a step to say that you're standing behind a thing and to get all of the privileges and gloriousness that comes with standing behind something and relating to people and having it be a human thing. And so if you're doing work that you're not super proud of and you can't find a way to be super proud of it, that's okay, right? We all gotta figure out how to survive and make a living and be alive and be able to do the work that we're doing. But when you do something that you are proud of, that you do want to stand behind, that's when we think it's really important that you feel comfortable putting your name on it and start to think about what that means and how to do that.
I would just add, I have some games. I have a game called Evacuation I made very early on in my game design career that I'm not super proud of, that I still put my name on anyway. And although I see problems in that game and I don't really feel like it sort of represents well my abilities as a designer, every time it goes down, because there's something wrong with my server, somebody will send me an email. They'll be like, oh, I need that game to be there. I need it. It's like so important to me. And I'm like, all right. So part of it is like it's not always for me to tell people which of my pieces of work are important or which connect as an artist. So I tilt the balance in favor of signing it.
I would also, Jesus Christ, now we're just ping-ponging. This is the danger of having two people on the stage. Yeah. I would also say that like I have, on my website, I have like everything I've ever put out since before I was in college, which is like deeply embarrassing. Some of that stuff is just like horrible photography. But the reason that it's up there is because I think that on the extremely rare chance that someone is going to come to my website and be like, oh, I like this person, how did they get to where they are? What was their path? Like, I think it's important that they see all the stuff that I thought was cool once upon a time and now I'm embarrassed about, because that was my path here and I want to share that. That's the kind of relationship I want to have with the people who like my work.
It's real.
Yeah, hey, thanks for the talk. My name's Yon, and I'm wondering what to do if you dislike your own name or if it is hard to pronounce or remember for people. So I adopted the pseudonym Yon. My name's Jonathan or Jonathan because I always thought it was too long and didn't mean anything. And then I found out after going by Yon for a couple of years, it's the most common name in Korea, so it's pretty much ungoogleable. And and also like I don't like my last name combined with the pseudonym doesn't make any sense. So I have this like weird, like every other pseudonym I ever worked under, I get tired of after about a year. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so my name is stupid but easy to pronounce. But it doesn't save me from that kind of problem. Foddy is actually a very rude word in Brazilian Portuguese. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think in that situation, if I was feeling that way, I would just pick a pseudonym and I would just stick to it for my whole career. That's what we're talking about is like connecting the game to an individual person. It doesn't matter what kind of name it is. Really, I really don't think it does matter. And Yon is definitely easier to pronounce. Also, you're the only Yon that I know, so that's cool. I know a bunch of Yon.
Should hang out with some more Koreans.
Hi, my name is Duncan. I'm a journalist. Question for Bennett. Have you played Celeste?
Yep.
OK, cool. First of all, what do you think of it? And second, how do you think you and Matt Makes Games differ or are similar in your creative styles? Because Getting Over It is kind of similar.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Matt's work, especially level design. I'm not actually good at video games, so I didn't get very far in Celeste. But I think that there is like some kind of similar ambition in that game. It's a game by a group of people, but it is about humanization in some kind of way. So I do see a strong connection there. I haven't played enough of it to give a really kind of deep view.
That's fine. Thank you.
Teddy.
Hi, I'm Teddy. I swear to God this is a real question, but feel free to disregard it and me. I'm using the mobile app for GDC, which I'm enjoying. And in the schedule, it says, put your name on your game, a talk by Bennett, ellipses. So I'm wondering, like process-wise, in the preparation of this talk, if you discussed whose name was going to appear first in the description or on this slide.
I don't know if you caught the slide about how you don't have control over how other people will credit you. There you go.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Hi, my question is about building a brand around yourself, and you talk about indie game devs as artists. I know like YouTubers and stuff, they always really build it around their personality a lot of the times. What is the process like doing that as a game dev, and like how is it different for you? Like if there's thousands of copies of your work out there, is it more personal? I mean, like we're not songwriters with big giant cult of the performer type things. Have you ever seen that? I don't know.
I think, I don't know what the best way to answer this. I guess for me, it was just like a very natural process. I think the reason I make things is because I want to share stuff with the world. Like I'm pretty shy, and I like putting out work so that when I talk to people, we can talk about it, when we can talk about what they put out, and we've like already shared this human level of connection through the things that we made, and then it's much easier to have a conversation with somebody. And so when I started to notice people on the internet starting to try to have a conversation with me about my work, which happened just totally because my name was there, it was very easy to engage with, and it was something that I was quite excited about because that's why I'm making it. I want to have those conversations. I want to get it out there. And I think when I started, I mean, I don't know how eloquent I am now, but I was definitely not very eloquent when I started because, like, why would I be? Like, who has the practice of figuring out how to get their message out to a lot of strangers? But that's part of the process of having these conversations is, like, you start to hone in on, like, oh, what are the things what are people seeing when they look at my work that gets them excited? How can I start to be clearer about what I want them to see? And how can I start to relate to the things that they're seeing? I think in a lot of, probably the biggest lesson I've learned in all of my time in game development is a broader appreciation for the kinds of things that I personally don't like that other people like. And a lot of my best games probably have come out of genres that I didn't like or didn't respect and had never spent time with, and then made something, and then people sort of liked it, and then I was like, oh, why do they like that? How can I relate to this person? Like, they're coming at it from such a totally different angle, and like I want to be there with them. I want to figure out how to like rotate my view to see what they're seeing.
Yeah, this is a thing that people will do to your work.
Yeah.
The experience that I had is the first games interview that I gave was for Wired magazine. Fred Bennett wanted to interview me for Wired. He had like a part-time gig writing for them. And so he wanted to write about QWOP in Wired, and I'd never given an interview about it before. I was working as a philosopher at the time. And Fred came in with these questions where he'd like looked at all my work and thought about how it connected to my work in philosophy, and he'd made all these connections between the different games, and he asked really smart questions, and I was like, oh my God, like, there's so much more going on in my work than I realized.
Yeah.
It really changed how I think about the work that I had done previously and how I thought about work going forward from that point. So this is something that can only happen if there's like some kind of individual contact.
And I think that's one of the best gifts that you can get from this. It really changed my perception of what press could be, because interrogating your own work as an artist is like impossible. It's so hard. And then it turns out people are going to do that for you and tell you about it. Like, that's amazing.
Yeah. Okay.
Hi, Mathilde Pignol, and I just released the game. It's an online multiplayer game, and I was actually advised to take my name off of it because in that genre, other developers have gotten death threats from players they have banned for cheating or bad behavior in the game. I'm just curious if you've experienced any kind of harassment and how you might have dealt with that.
Yeah, a little bit. I think in the genres that I work in, it's not as much of a problem. I think that was probably good advice that the person gave you in that context. And I think what Zach and I were trying to get across here is there are going to be situations where there's some other considerations that just overwhelm all of these things, right? Like if you're really worried about the particular base of players, then that absolutely safety should come first, I think.
Yeah, I've never had harassment on one of my games, but I did write a Polygon article a while ago that I got a lot of shit for.
Yeah.
And it was really scary and horrible. It is horrible. That's like very real. And I got just the tiniest amount of it. So, I mean, I think as with everything, being safe and comfortable and happy and having a good life is kind of the most important thing that you can have. But I guess part of this talk is that when we were coming up with it, we were starting to realize that like maybe there are things that we can do that can sort of push the industry in a place where that isn't something that we have to worry about quite as much. That like if we can engage with this uncomfortable thing in a way that's safe, then like maybe things will get a little bit better.
Thanks.
I have a hypothetical situation where you create a business with your own brand. You still have to have a business to accept money from Steam and iOS and stuff, but now all of a sudden you're in legal trouble and now you need to fold the business that has your name on it. And
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I would love to have a business. Yeah. I would love to, but I can't because I'm on a non-immigrant visa in the United States. So.
You can set up a sole proprietorship LLC. My business does not have my name on it. It's SGFJ LLC, but I do business under my own name.
Right, and you've basically removed STFJ branding from your games as well.
Right, yeah, but that doesn't mean that that's not the legal entity.
Yep.
Hi there, Liam. I messed up my own name, sorry. Liam Sove, thanks for the talk. So if there's one takeaway from the talk, it's creating a human connection from the game to the developer. During the talk, sorry, this is for Bennett. During the talk, you expressed your displeasure, dissatisfaction with the streaming culture surrounding games.
Yep.
And being that and getting over it is really all about the human connection of the game. I was wondering why there was a strong choice in your marketing for the game, particularly the trailer, where it's almost entirely focused on the streamers, on the people that weren't playing the game.
Oh, that's not the main trailer. I made a streaming trailer after it had already blown up with streamers.
Oh, okay.
The main trailer, I used to actually have in the talk. I don't have it handy right now, but it starts out it's just me. It's just playing the game, and I say, why did I make this, right? And then I suggest in that trailer that there might be some people who like this kind of horrible thing. So in that trailer, what I'm actually doing is I'm saying, well, I'm a particular person. I did a weird thing. I made this strange game. But I had in mind somebody who would like it, a particular person. And so I actually was framing it in that way from the absolute beginning. But I will say, like, I did, as I said, I came in with some resentments about streaming culture. I felt like it was kind of feeding this disconnect. But I think I was just wrong. Like, one of the things that I kind of came to grips with through the process was just to have more respect for that and to sort of understand the human dimension of people watching games being streamed as well. Yep.
Wonderful, thank you.
Hi. So first off, thanks. Secondly, so you talked a little bit about kind of, Zach, you talked about being kind of thrown into the public scene and maybe not necessarily anticipating the degree of attention or the amount of attention you'd get. Bennett, you talked about, essentially being messaged every time someone finished your game, and both of those sound kind of invasive in terms of personal life. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the balance between kind of personal and professional, where that fell apart, and how you survived just as a human.
Do you want to start this?
Yeah, this is a hard question. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, my game is, even in the chat room, is not as unguarded as one of Nina Freeman's games. It's at a certain remove. It's a professional remove. I'm the game developer, you're the player. And I'm giving away some of my thoughts about the game and about playing games and about what it means to confront challenge in that. And that's personal, it's like real. Those are my real feelings, but I'm not telling them about my life or giving them my home address or anything like that. And that was how I felt I had to protect myself and kind of maintain those boundaries. And I don't think it's easy. I think you have to kind of strike the right level. It's going to be different for every game as well. Some games are about somebody's personal experience. I could never do what Tale of Tales did with the naked body scans. that just for me would be impossible. But you know, it's just going to be different in every case.
Yeah, I guess I probably have two processes. So one is if I'm thinking about doing a work and something is uncomfortable, I think it's important to engage with that discomfort and to think about it. Like a lot of this stuff, this has like been such a weird talk for me because like I don't care about any of this business stuff, and it's weird for me to put up a slide that has like all the clippings that like would be on like my mom's fridge or whatever. Like that's fucking weird. But I felt like there was like a value in engaging with that discomfort because I'm trying to convince you of something that I think is really important. And on that level, dealing with discomfort, it's like worth it to engage it because I'm doing it on my terms. In terms of after a game is out, how people are reacting to it, if something makes me uncomfortable, I just leave it alone, or I like don't read the reviews for a week, or I block a key. Like it's not, at that point, like once you're not creating something, then you should just be focusing on like, how can I lead a happy, healthy life? How can I continue to create work and feel comfortable? Like then it's okay to, because it's not on your terms anymore. Now it's like shared with people, and it's going to be the same kind of interaction that you would have anywhere. If someone started talking to you at a party and it was uncomfortable, you'd walk away, and that's fine. You don't have to. There's no additional value to engaging with.
Awesome, thank you.
Good time.
Cool.
All right, thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.